Hey there everybody and welcome back to another Blender tutorial. In this one I'm going to be showing you how to make a Mario brick block, which isn't just like a random tutorial. I want to spend the next couple tutorials, in other words a series, focusing on making World 1 level 1 of Mario, but in 3 dimensions. So we're going to not only model the terrain, but the background and Mario, we're going to animate him. So that's what this series is about, and part 1 of that is making this brick block that once we have it, we can just take it and duplicate it and very quickly make a stage. One interesting thing about this that you're going to learn in this tutorial is not only how to make the geometry, but how to get this to look kind of like eroded and realistic, and we'll talk about that. But let's get started, and no need to save. Making this is actually surprisingly simple. It involves a lot of selection, but it's not too bad. Start, not with the default cube, but another cube, of course. Go into edit mode and add a bevel. And we're going to have a couple loops for this. You can kind of have this be a thin bevel or a big bevel, depending on the look you're going for. I'm going to go somewhere in between. And now it's all a matter of basically isolating parts of this and saying, for some parts, extrude the bricks outwards, etc. The easiest way I found is it's almost like we're modeling a Rubik's Cube. Add 3 loop cuts on the X, Y, and Z axes. So now we have these 3 loop cuts, and you're also going to take them and add a tiny bit of a bevel. And this, you'll see why this is relevant in a second. It's going to be the mortar in between the bricks, like the gaps in between where you put the cement, or the glue. Not glue, but cement. We're going to bevel this, but with only one division. And you can see this kind of takes our mesh and divides it into a lot of sections. So at this point, I'm going to make a selection that might seem a bit weird, but you'll see how I'm doing it in a second. So this is one chunk, and what I want you to imagine is for each chunk, we're going to extrude it outwards. This is another chunk, and you basically kind of just follow the pattern that this creates. So each little island is going to be its own thing. Now, if you wanted to be fast about this, there is a symmetry that you can exploit in this. So you can actually just select half of this and then flip it or mirror it, but I'm just going to do it the hard way. So first I'm going to select these, and then for these middle segments I just select everything in between. And if this takes a while, I'll fast forward, but I just want you to see the modeling process. On the top we're going to pick a square, and then I believe we can do the same kind of thing here. So square, like this, square, like this. So this is like the second layer of the Rubik's Cube in some sense. And then finally, we're going to do the same thing on the bottom that we did on the top. So you can see how modeling this is actually pretty intuitive. And I think I actually did a tutorial on this a long time ago, but I do want to make this more realistic than I did before, and again, make it part of a series so you could actually just watch this entire thing, and ideally make World 1 Level 1 of Super Mario Bros. By the way, I saw the 3D Mario movie. The first time I fell asleep actually, and I arrived late, so I didn't realize it took place in New York City before they went to the Mushroom Kingdom. Spoilers ahead. So when I went to rewatch it, it was a bit of a trip. I don't know if I recommend that movie or not, but it's definitely very beautiful, and I guess that's what gave me the idea of making this 3D render thing. Either way, make the selection that basically has everything except these mortars in this kind of pattern, and then we're going to hit Alt-E to extrude along normals. And you can make that a lot or little. Additionally, we are going to select the boundary loop. I already have that command there, which is going to give us an edge selection of everything that encompasses the face selection. So this is what we had before, and I want kind of to make a bevel. So I'm going to select boundary loop, and then you can just add a bevel with a single, I wouldn't do multiple, it kind of smooths it out too much. I kind of like the look of a single segment bevel, because I think it looks more cartoony in a sense. Okay, next thing is we're going to, of course, make it shade smooth, and since that breaks the shading, I'm going to make it auto smooth. So this is our base model, and now you're wondering, Tom, other than the materials, how do we make this thing look like rock and eroded and all that? Well, I'm glad you asked. I actually made a add-on or a plugin for Blender that does this exactly, and it's a paid add-on, but there's also a free version that I made available that you can use to make this project. So in the description, you're going to see a link or something to my add-on Erode It. It took so long to get these icons to work. Basically what this is it's a one-button solution with other options to select a model. We're just going to select it and click Erode It. And you're going to see it kind of turns this into like a disaster, but we're going to be able to control this erosion and make it not break our brick. So you can see in the modifiers, it's added a whole bunch of stuff. I'm just going to take the smoothing down a lot. I think that's the main thing. Yeah, that's the main thing that makes it look like this. There's a whole bunch of like settings here that let you control the erosion and stuff like this. I'm just going to make this have a less intense depth, and also maybe the shading could be less intense. And like I said, I made a free version of this available. That's just a one-click solution, maybe without some of these settings. But that's fine. Finally, I want to take this, now that I like the settings and all this, and I want to take the resolution and increase it. So that's just going to make my erosion more high quality. So again, this is the secret to getting realistic erosion. Just download my add-on and click the one button. Get the free or the paid version, whatever suits you. So now we get a model that actually has a lot more detail, and we can add even more detail when it comes to the material and stuff like that. But first, I'm just going to apply modifiers. If you have the free version, it does this automatically. And what it's going to do is it's going to make a very dense mesh of this, since we don't want to have a bunch of objects with modifiers. If it's a bit too much for you, you can feel free to decimate this, because this is like 180,000 polygons. I'm going to decimate it by a factor of 0.5. So this is without, this is with. It looks like pretty much identical. So I'm just going to apply that to get like half the resolution. And now you can see it's triangulated, but we don't care because it's the detail we want. Okay. Finally, let's make a material. For that, I'm going to use cycles so we can actually get a good preview of what this looks like. And I'm just doing what I always do, where I set up an HDRI environment for the lighting. So here you can see we have an HDRI that is lighting our brick block, and it's already going to look pretty good because a lot of the detail is in the geometry itself. But we can extract even more detail out of this using the material for very cheap computationally. Okay, so the way we are going to do that, very simple material, go to shading, select your object, make a material, and we're going to take this and we are going to call it brick. We kind of want to strike a balance between cartoonishness, because that's a Mario thing, but also realism, right? I don't want it to be super realistic, otherwise Mario is going to look like a human in a plumber suit. I want it to still be cartoony. So here's how we strike the balance. We're first going to go for realism, and then we're going to make it cartoony. So for the brick, I'm going to take the base color and kind of make it this dark reddish. You can kind of play around with what that looks like, but this seems to be kind of the correct color. The next thing is you can play with how shiny this is. So this is the roughness. Do you want it to be very shiny, like it's a wet brick, and maybe that's something you want, or very diffuse? I'm going to go for something somewhere in the middle, but then the biggest detail is adding surface detail, surface imperfections. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to use a noise texture, connect this to the bump. So this is our noise texture on the model. Doesn't matter that it's decimated, it's just wrapping with generated coordinates. Turn this into normal coordinates, plug this in, and now you can see we got extra detail for free. So this is without, and this is with. Looks pretty disgusting, right? So bring up the scale, bring up the detail, and take down the strength. This way we have the before and the after. It just adds a little something. Easier to see if we're up close. So this is before and after. And you can kind of play around with the strength of this. Maybe I want to bring the scale up even more. And I think I like the look of that. So without, with. So we did a pretty good job on the realism. I think another thing we can do is we could add a different color for the mortar, which is to say the gaps in between. Since this is kind of like a messy model, we can just use ambient occlusion or something like that. You can use a bevel map, whatever, to extract this. Ambient occlusion is going to basically give us the areas that are very kind of concave in a sense, where it's almost touching itself in a way. Not that way, but you know, in a way. For ambient occlusion, I'm going to make sure to do only local, which basically what it means is it's only going to calculate the ambient occlusion with itself. Otherwise, what it would do is if we had an object here, it would actually affect the ambient occlusion. You can see it gets a bit darker here. So it actually matters. So I'm going to make sure this is only local, and then I'm going to take a color ramp to bring up the intensity. And you can see for free, not only do we get the mortar, but because we have some extra geometry going on, we get some like extra details with this ambient occlusion, which is nice. Okay, so one color can be black, and the other color can be this brown that I'm just going to copy over. So now when I connect this to the base color, we get something that looks much better. So before, after. And feel free to play around with the color of this. So maybe it could be like a bright blue or whatever you're going for. I think I'm going to go for kind of a normal Mario aesthetic, so kind of a grayish red, maybe a tiny bit darker. So this is without, this is with. I think it just adds something. And then the final piece de resistance, the thing that is going to take this from realistic, because it kind of looks real. What is going to take it from realism to cartoony is we're actually going to turn on some subsurface scattering. Now, this might seem like a weird choice, because subsurface scattering is for things like wax and candles and like flesh. But you'll notice if we increase subsurface, it almost makes it look like softer in a sense. And especially if we take our subsurface and make the color of that subsurface like an orangey red, you can see this is without. And this is with. Like it automatically looks more cartoony. What's happening under the hood here is light is kind of seeping through it, which is not realistic, right? It's a opaque, solid brick thing, but I think it just adds like a good bit of realism. And if you wanted to, you can play around with some of these settings to see like how the light interacts and stuff like that. I don't really mess with that since I don't really know what a lot of this means. But you could have different like wavelengths of stuff pass through differently, okay? So without subsurf, with. Don't make it intense, maybe like 0.1 at most. And I think with this, I want to take my mortar and make it even darker, now that I know what it's going to look like. And I'll take down the subsurface just a bit. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to take this model, and I'm going to call it brick. And then I think at this point, it's just a matter of copy and pasting this, right? What you can do is you can have like one brick like this, and you could go for different patterns if this looks a bit off to you. I don't really know what the bricks look like. You go like this, then you rotate it by 90 degrees, so not every brick is identical. Take this, copy it, yada yada. In fact, what we'd probably want to do is instancing, so that we're not adding a bunch of geometry for no reason. But you can see very quickly we can make a kind of varied looking platformer. And some of these I can rotate by like 180 degrees just to get the back side, which has slightly different erosion. And you can see very quickly we can make a course. What the rest of this is going to involve is, you know, building the course, but getting blocks like the question block, Goombas, Mario, background, stuff like that. So that is part 1 of the series. Hopefully you enjoyed. Make sure to check out Erode-it, not only for this tutorial, which it's useful for, but it's just a general tool I've been working on. So if you find use in it, that is the place to get it, in the description. So thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next one.